Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. Today with me, I have Rich Alderton. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Ross. Good to be here.
Likewise, I'm very excited for a number of reasons. One, I'm in a brand new environment. So I've been last year building a new home office at the end of the garden. It's been a big project. And whilst I've built a recording studio that isn't quite ready, I'm in the office part of it. So I'm doing the first episode for those who are just listening from my new home office. So I'm super excited about that. But the other part I'm excited about is I found Rich Alderton online, and my co-founder and I, Mike, reached out. And your title was just amazing. You know, adaptability advisor. We thought, we've got to get him on the show. We've got to get him in. Who is this guy? And how do we learn from him? So joining from Cambridge, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And you run a business called High Performance Change for the last 7 years or so, but a real eclectic history that you've gone through. I'll just give a quick overview for our listeners, and then we'll start to unpack some of that journey, Rich, if we may. So starting out as a graduate in management training at Boots in the UK. For those in the UK will know of Boots. It's a big pharmacy here. And then shifting to a shift manager at Fox Biscuits. I am a big biscuit fiend and fan, so a little stint there. But then the majority of time when I look and do my internet stalking was at two big firms. One was GSK, and you were there for nearly a decade as a procurement director. And then at Tetra Pak, in fact, in a previous life, Tetra Pak were a big client of ours in my marketing agency. And you ended up there sort of as a regional CEO for New Zealand, Australia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And now sitting as a non-executive director, board advisor in startups and scale-ups, and just driving value through high performance coach. And I'm just so excited to learn. So tell me a little bit, about some of the highlights of the journey, that why maybe you led 7 years ago to making that shift from what could be seen as at the top end of a corporate ladder into then going as an adventure off by yourselves. What were some of the triggers in that, Rich?
Yeah, great question. I think the overriding thing for me was that having climbed the corporate ladder, kind of middle order batsman CEO, I could have carried on having got there and tried to get bigger and bigger CEO roles. I suppose that would have been the conventional thing to do. But what I realized was that even when you're a CEO, and of course, when you are a CEO, you get lots of choice. You get some choice. You don't get choice in everything you do. But the thing I figured out that really made me tick was helping people to embrace change and to enjoy it as much as I do. I think I've been very lucky in my life in that, I seem to have been gifted this love of change. And that certainly doesn't make me unique, but it does seem to make people like us rare. So I thought, well, I can go on making rich people richer, and I can go on keeping stakeholders happy and doing monthly reports and all of that good stuff. And there is very good stuff in their leadership development and seeing people come up. But I really thought that the time had come to just dedicate myself to helping people become more adaptable, because all I can see, and I'm sure you can too, that's why you're in this line of work, is that the world is only becoming more and more unpredictable. There's more and more change, more of it that we can't see coming. We didn't need COVID to remind us that that was the case. And if you don't like change, well, you're probably going to enjoy your life less and less the more and more you go through that life. So I decided to dedicate myself to full time to helping people deal with it as well as I usually do.
So this notion of this animal, this enemy or friend that's called change, that shows up every day in our lives. And for some go, hey, come on into the party. We love you. We like you. These rare people that, embrace and like change, and others that try and push them out the door and do everything they can to avoid change. I think what I'm interested in is, so if you're helping people live a life when change is in your party, whether you like him or not, right? He's next to you, he's in bed with you, he's by your side at the work, he's everywhere or she's everywhere. That relationship with change, what is it that you've observed either in yourself or through your experience to help people deal with that? And I know that you talk a lot about, these things of building roadmaps, and also, simple practical tools that might be a bit counterintuitive, but what are some of the elements that you've built in your toolkit to help people have a better relationship with that thing called change?
Yeah, okay. Well, first, I think the most important thing to say is that adaptability intelligence is a phrase that we both use, and there are a few pages of Google dedicated to that. But the reason I think it's so important, it's not just semantics and it's not just consultancy speak. It really helps to convey the message that adaptability is something that you can learn. And that sounds kind of obvious when you're talking about it in an academic setting in the cold light of day. But the reality is that most people, when you ask them, think that their relationship with change is pretty much fixed in stone because they can't remember the last time that they became more adaptable. And when I ask that question, when I run seminars and stuff, very few people can actually remember. I had one lady a few weeks ago in London who gave me a brilliant example of how she had become more adaptable as the result of a tragic loss in the family. But she would be the exception rather than the rule. And people need to be told, or at least reminded, that adaptability is a skill that we can learn and develop. And, it's not something that you were gifted at birth and you're either lucky or unlucky. It is something that you can do something about. And I'm guessing that, that gets you leaping gazelle-like out of bed in the morning as much as it does me. So anyway, your question was, what are some of the tools? Well, the tools stem from an understanding of how we react to change. And as you said earlier, we can do that positively or negatively. And we've designed a model that combines traditional psychology, which, for the first 150 years of its existence has been all about neutralizing a negative. And in the last 30 years, we've really started talking a lot more about positive psychology and that it can make what we can do to make ourselves better, bigger, faster, improved compared with what we are today. And that really fires me up. So it's really a combination of using tools that firstly help us get us out of our own way, which is very important because our raw negative emotional primal response to change was really helpful when we were out there and change came in the form of a saber-toothed tiger and we did things like fight or flight, kept us alive. But if you look in your HR handbook these days, both of those are disciplinary offences. So it's not going to help you out. So we've got to do something different. And the other big major and negative emotion that we all feel about change is anxiety. So if fear is our reaction to a clear and present danger, then anxiety is our worry about what might be happening over the horizon that we can't yet see. And it's great in the workplace today that there is so much more talk about anxiety than there was when I came into the workplace a few decades ago. But really talking about anxiety, not just for welfare and feeling good, but actually applied anxiety to help you deal with change, to make you more adaptable. I think that's a really useful thing that people like us can do.
And is this something where if we have this joint view that adaptability is something that's learnable, is it something that's learnable by yourself or do you need help? Is this something that innately in change we can't get out of our way? You mentioned, that phrase, we get out of our way. And it reminded me of this notion of, you can't see your own label inside, when you're in the jam jar. Do we need someone else to help us observe ourselves, to go through that process and break through in a evolving our relationship and our ability to adapt? Do we need help? Or is it something we can just do with the right tools or the right stimulation? What have you seen that works really well in that context?
I think it's a two-pronged approach. And you mentioned one of them, which is that, we need others to hold up a mirror to us and help us see that. So when I work with teams and when we do action planning at the end of every session, I always use a buddy system so that people can have a sounding board, that they can hold a mirror up to each other. I think that's very important. But the other thing is the tools you mentioned. And in the intro, you said, and you've obviously done your homework, that some of these skills are counterintuitive, because what you're doing is you are actually trying to unwind 50,000 years of evolution. Because, as I said, fight and flight worked really well then, not so much now. So you don't need a degree in rocket science to understand anything that I put in my models and my approach. But actually doing those things is really quite difficult. So, for example, in fear, of course, we're designed to fight or flee. There are processes in our brain that actually shut it down from getting access to the fancy neocortex and all those higher functions. Why? Because all of that is brilliant and it's the biggest supercomputer in the world, but it takes a while to operate. And that, when you're in the savannah, is the difference between being life and lunch. So to act really quickly, you stop thinking. And that, again, is not really useful in the modern age. When you're facing change, when you're faced with change that generates fear, that's when you need to be thinking the most, not the least. So even understanding that, most people probably haven't even thought about it. Maybe some people could understand it, could get there if they thought about it for a minute, but most don't. But actually, yes, it does take most people some education to understand that. And then it takes some training, which is why I don't tend to go in and, just do a standard 2-day workshop. I tend to work with my clients over a protracted period, because learning these tools is very different from using them.
Yeah. And it's a rewiring, isn't it, that we're trying to deal with? And I guess it reminds me of the title of the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And this balance where we feel pressure, we feel anxiety, and that can be internal and external. We can have an internal anxiety about an unknown, unpredictable situation or event, and we create the thousands of stories of what might happen. And that heightens all sorts of things, from our breathing to our heart rate to then the shutting down of the various parts of our brain that then impairs our ability to think. And then this pressure of other things like, I need an answer. I need it now. Look how fast the market's going. And your leader's saying, I need a solution, need this. Oh, we need to reskill. And all of a sudden our voices, the pace, everything feels heightened. And this state of being able to prepare for thinking, to think in a state that is ready for that. Often we just go, no, we've got to do the thinking act, right? We're brainstorming, we're doing this. Have we actually done the stretching? When we go and do a run or we go and do an exercise, we do some prep, right? We don't suddenly eat a massive meal and then run out without, go without stretching. The same is true, I think, a lot of dealing with change. Have we done our stretches? Have we done the preparation ready for that thinking? Have we changed our physical state to allow the mental state to perform and serve us? And all of that sounds great, but then it also adds some more pressure. Oh, so I've got to slow down this. I've got to do all of those things. And it is a shift. And I wonder where, at points in your career, have you noticed when you can look back that you now might have had a different habit, had a different routine where things went the right way or wrong way in certain critical decisions for you that maybe others are facing right now, that you have this benefit of hindsight, that you could perhaps share some of those things throughout your career, that knowing what you know now, what would you maybe have done different in certain situations? I'm curious as to what highlights out for you of moments when you reflect.
I think burnout is the thing I've learned most in my career. I've been reasonably ambitious and not always successful. But I have worked extremely hard. That's been a kind of red thread through my career. And I didn't really know when to stop, when to say no. I would work, 25 hours a day if I could. I had a global job. I was running a global supply chain at one point. I was doing 250,000 kilometers a year and never at home. And when I was at home, I was just recharging my batteries and was a complete zombie vegetable, ready to, get back to Heathrow and do it all again on first thing on Monday morning. So I think what I have learned since I have stepped back and I have been more in an advisory role than in a kind of ownership role and a CEO role, is that they say there's nothing like teaching for learning, and I've seen for myself that I certainly didn't get that balance right. And what I have learned in the research I've done is that when your brain gets overloaded, its capacity and its ability actually falls. So how do you counteract that? Well, you end up working more hours because you're now less efficient in your brain, and you get into that vicious circle. And that can happen when you face change as well. The anxiety is all about digging yourself a vicious circle that you as you said, the thousands of things, you come up with a negative possible event, you multiply that by another negative possible event, then you end up multiplying that eventually by your phone number, and you've created an exponential cliff that you've just about to go and walk off the edge of. And the problem with anxiety is that once you've started digging that hole, you use up all your energy doing that, and you've got none to lift yourself back out. And I can certainly look back in my career and see that was something that happened to me, although I didn't necessarily realize it at the time.
I guess it's similar to this situation, a bit like Breaking Bad, one little event, and then each little step and event after that seems incrementally inconsequential. But then when you look at it over a month or 2 months or a year, and you go, wow, who am I? I don't even recognize myself. And it takes a, critical event. Is why they're saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't that straw. It's the thousands of other straws that came before. And I think many of us don't give ourselves permission to behave differently, because we did something yesterday and we made a commitment to it, to ourselves, to a delivery. Oh, we've got to just keep do that next thing. And the sitting back and reflect, well, I don't have time for that, And so once you're on the burnout train, it's very hard to get off the burnout train until you're burnt out. And I think this is where others and leaders need to take responsibility, because they can observe that, they can see it in people, and they need to support them and help and put those things in place rather than, just relying on self. And I think it is a balance, because it can't be just others' responsibility. It has to be to yourself. So it is a dual thing. And it's why in our model, we have these 3 areas of ability, character, and environment, because we might have all the abilities, but our environment's not conducive to change. And we might have a great environment, but not have the abilities or certain characteristics that show up. Like when you mentioned, these characteristics could be inbuilt, fight or flight elements. They can be rewired, but it's a lot harder, And one of the things that's interesting is our ambition is around leaving no one behind. And it's this balance of approach. And I'm interested you've worked in large organizations, and a lot of large organizations function from hierarchy, CEO role, there's a decision making, there's flow of information, and there's in advisories, is this a bottom up, ground up kind of initiative? Is it top down? And all of these phrases of how do we shift and make change happen? So from an individual basis, when we're thinking about that of top down versus bottom up, or we think about it from internal versus external, what are the sort of things that someone could look at internally and externally to help give them those early warnings of burnout? So rather than just, oh, I'm stressed, I'm not sleeping well, maybe thinking about it through those lenses of what might be some of the outcomes that are coming that show up in the environment and to others that we might be easier seen than maybe our ability to observe ourselves, that might get us upstream of that burnout challenge of observing. I'm curious, with your experience and observations, where you might see some opportunity.
Well, it's a very good question about that relationship between internal and external. And just as you have a whole section of your model on environment, I spend an entire day with my clients talking about, once we've figured out what the adaptability elements and the tools that we're going to choose and the action planning and all of that, we spend a day then talking about the organization's culture and which bits of the culture are going to support everything that we've done to raise their adaptability intelligence, and those bits of the culture that are going to crush it. And a different debate about what their company culture should be, although that's a debate for another day. The key thing, the key relationship that I start with this between internal and external is quite simple. That if you're the case, here is my lord, the case for adaptability. If your external environment is moving faster than your internal environment, then you'll, and probably sooner, fall over. And as soon as people understand that, then immediately they say that adaptability is more important to them than they were thinking, because very, very few organizations will have the temerity to say that they are moving faster than their external environment. And even if they do...
Rich, could you just take us through that again? Because that's a really critical point and piece that you're making there. And I don't want people to miss that of, the question, how you phrased it, and go through. So just take us through that slowly again for people. Okay. So, is your external environment going quicker? That piece, I think it was just so genius. Can you just share that again?
So of course, so your external environment is everything that you cannot control, everything outside of the boundaries of you or your organization. You could apply this to you or as an individual or as an organization. And if your external environment, so your competitors, your stakeholders, your regulators, geopolitics, demographics, everything out there that impacts on you internally, if all of that is moving faster than you're able to move, and when I say faster than you're able to move, I'm talking about mentally. Have you got the adaptability to be able to keep up? Whether you've got all the right people in place and the right resources and machinery and technology, that's a debate for another day. Where I can help organizations is in their mental adaptability. So if your external environment is moving faster than your internal environment, then there can be only one conclusion to that situation, which is over time, you will start falling behind if you're not already, until you're so far behind that you fall over. Unless you're running a government department and you're a monopoly, in which case you stay alive, but you just become completely
irrelevant, maybe,
and ineffective. Yeah,
you still exist, but your relevancy is then into question.
Yeah. Does that answer what you are?
That's perfect. And I think this ability to just even ask questions and observe, to think about what's happening in my industry, what is the language, can I think in the way in which allows me to add value, allows me to remain relevant. So whether that's on a systems based and organization space, or it's just in your role and your skills, is what's going on around you going faster than what your thinking is. Are you trying to protect from automation or these various things because you want to retain the value you're delivering, or can you think in that same way to open up new opportunities? And often that's where anxiety shows up, right? When we feel we're being replaced, when we're becoming irrelevant by a new person, sometimes, or by a new technology sometimes, or a new way of thinking. So when that happens very practically, if someone's listening and going, do you know what, I'm very anxious, I'm fearful, the leadership team or people are talking about adopting new ways of doing things for efficiency that makes me feel vulnerable, that makes me question my identity of who I am. Second thing after the name, so what do you do? If my title and my role is now in question and I'm feeling anxious about it, what do I do next?
Okay. So I'll give you, so we've devised a whole bunch of antidotes, tools to combat the reasons that people resist change, and stimulants to boost the reasons that they love them. I said before about this kind of yin and yang, that we have to deal with the negative sides of change, and then that clears the understanding, it clears the platform for us to understand that change actually it can be a hugely positive, powerful thing in our lives. And I'll just give you one of the antidotes, and that is antidotes to fear is discovery. So of course your fight and flight says bash this saber-toothed tiger on the nose, or run away into the long grass until it can't find you anymore. Either way, it's not terribly useful these days. And the totally counterintuitive response to that is don't run away from your fear, run towards the source of it. Find out everything that you can about that source of the fear. So if you've just lost your job, like what was the example you gave? You've changed your job title. There's been a reorganization, and you've just got a new job title. So all the things you're worrying about is my scope of work bigger or smaller? Do I have to change locations? Am I actually competent to do this job? I've got a little bit of imposter syndrome, and they're going to find me out now, and I haven't got the skills to operate in this brave new world. They've given me this new IT system, and I hated my old one right up until the moment that they tried to take it away from me, and now I don't know. All of these thoughts are going through your head, and what your amygdala is saying inside your brain is run away, or beat your boss up, or write them an email in capital letters saying how wrong this new job is. The trick is to stop all of that, and as you say, limber up, give your brain a bit of a workout, and then do a 180 and head right into the source of that fear. Find out everything you can about that role, and you'll either find that you didn't need to worry in the first place, or you did need to worry, and your fears and your anxieties were actually founded. And even if that is the case, then at least you know where you stand, and that will give you a better informed position from which to make your next move, as opposed to running around like a headless chicken, fighting, fleeing, or digging yourself a big anxiety hole.
I love this. And I had in my head this visual piece of just a simple two-step change. Fear into fact, 2 letters. The antidote of fear is fact. Go on discovery, fill it full of facts, so that will, the aim, I guess, is reduce fear. So the more facts we get, going from unknown to known, the better we are then to make a decision. So
that's brilliant, Ross. I'm going to nick that.
Feel free. That's what I love. And Dan, we spoke about briefly before, Dan Sullivan. We need to know what our unique ability is as individuals, and then how does it show up? And for me, I learn through conversation, and I think through conversation. And one of the pieces is a synthesizer of information and a rearticulator. And he would always hope that at the end of a long session of an hour that I'd spark up for 5 minutes at the end and say what everyone's just been talking about in a way that everyone can understand. And it's just the way my brain works. And so that fear to fact. So if that's step one, when we're faced with a shift, a change, and a immune system responses, if we haven't fought with generally in fear, because like you say, that's probably a less disciplinary act, to be fearful than it is to fight. So I've now got some facts and I've got those things. What's next in that shift to become highly adaptable and more intelligent about our value, our relevancy, our mental health, and our well-being of a life that is thriving through change? What's the next part?
Okay, well, there is a next logical step, because if you think about the saber-toothed tiger and that caused us to evolve this fear response that we've got, that versions of humans that didn't have that aren't around anymore. And we survived in a world of saber-toothed tigers when they didn't. So fear is our response to a clear and present danger. It's actually happened, it's actually there, and it's real. At least it's real in our minds. So what's going to happen next is that the saber-toothed tiger is going to disappear off into the long grass. And that is when your fear subsides. The only good thing about fear is that it only lasts for as long as that clear and present danger is present. There is something called chronic fear, but don't worry about that. What we start feeling then is anxiety, because now we're worrying about what might happen in the future. Where's the saber-toothed tiger gone? Is he still hungry? Am I still on the menu? Am I the fastest or slowest guy in my village? You know, all of these things are going through your mind. So there is a natural progression from fear being, you know, the most acute response to change. And then we move on to anxiety. And the biggest problem with, well, no, there are lots of problems with anxiety. One of them is that it is the silent killer of our motivation to change, because we are absolute legends in keeping our anxiety hidden. And the other is our anxiety, unlike fear, can last for as long as we can imagine problems in our life coming up. You know, we have imagination. We are the only species out of 9 million that has imagination. And we also have what psychologists call negativity bias, which again was a protective response that we developed back in the savannah. The problem is, each of them on their own is brilliant, but you multiply a negativity bias by an overactive imagination, and no wonder that we find it much, much easier to predict a future for ourselves that is going to end in disaster and an exponential cliff than we can in, you know, roses and sunshine. It all comes from that self-protecting environment, hostile environment that we used to inhabit, but we don't anymore.
And I guess it's that chemical junkie called our brain that, you know, we now know a little bit of how it functions. So we feed it, you know, in our entire society. When we look at the level of dystopian movies versus utopian movies, of negative news versus good news, we only, you know, the bombardment of negativity is because of the addict of our brain that gets the hit and response from those things, perpetuates it. And you talked about this vicious cycle. So if inside anxiety that comes after fear that lasts longer is this zone of procrastination, is this zone of paralysis, this zone of, you know, how do we shift out from that? Is it a big smack with a wet fish? You know, is it the everyone has a plan to be hit in the face kind of Mike Tyson moment? Or is it a slowly creeping, you know, and exploring still in fact mode? Is it a combination? What's the sort of way to shift from, if fear goes to fact and fact goes to anxiety, how do we go from anxiety to the positive element of the next phase in the roadmap, in the ability to look at pathways, so that we have agency over our futures and development? So give me a view of the Rich Alderton roadmap for the next phase in our story.
Okay. Well, okay. Again, I'll give you another antidote. So if you accept what I've said is that, okay, so one of the key things is to understand that there is a difference between fear and anxiety. And we use those terms interchangeably in society, but they are different. And again, it's not just semantics, because understanding that they are different means that we can treat them, we have to treat them differently. So if fear is something that happens in the present and anxiety is something that happens in the future, So Joseph Ledoux said that anxiety is the price we pay for a highly active imagination. So he's recognizing that anxiety is something that stems from what we are thinking about in the future. So the obvious answer is, if anxiety is happening there ahead of time, then what we need to do is practice a bit of mindfulness. Now, I can see your listeners rolling their eyes. You know, and if I don't know if you're watching this, or if you're not watching this, you're just listening to this. You know, I'm not sat here in a caftan. I'm not speaking in soft Californian tones. You know, because there's a type of mindfulness that I really like, and it's called informal mindfulness. It's not one of those technical, formal things like yoga, Pilates, and meditation, and all of that good stuff. I am absolutely not qualified for that. But just that principle of living in the moment, and it's probably, since I set up this practice, it's probably the single biggest thing that has changed my life, is just, you know, when I did set up the business and I went from being a very busy CEO to a bit of an ego-crushing silence on the first Monday of the business, you know, then you learn mindfulness pretty quickly. So it's really about the more, and you know, we can't all be fully mindful all of the time. I certainly can't be. But the more that you can be mindful, by definition, the less anxious you can be, because you are not thinking so much about this step multiplied by this negative step, you know, leading to this. The more that we can live in the present, if we can be fully mindful in theory, then we should have zero anxiety. Now, that's a theoretical extreme, but that is absolutely, and hopefully people will understand that, you know, lots of people talk about mindfulness these days, and it's great that they do, but I am not some kind of guru sitting on top of a hill. This for me is very real. It's very useful, and it works for me personally, which is why I'm such an advocate.
Yeah. So you describe this rich version of mindful as being present, and it's this, you know, sort of informal mindfulness, that if anxiety exists in this future, in our mind story that's created, if we bring that back to being very present, then we're reducing the ability for our mind to run off with itself. So exactly, I really like that. That's super practical. One of the other things I've learned is what's the data input we're putting in. So we talked about this before of how are we making our decisions from the stories we tell ourselves. Some of it's from the experiences we've had in the past. Oh, this happened, so this is likely to happen again, or this did this, or whatever it may be. So we form a collective view that then sets up our biases, which can aid us or can hold us back. So if we're pre-programmed to a negative bias, we need to over-influence that with a positive bias, even just to get back to neutral. And I remember a few things as I was growing up about, you know, these sayings, you are what you eat. And so, you know, I had visions of, you know, what do I become? And I've been vegan for many years now. And, you know, what does that make me? Am I suddenly a vegetable, or do I think differently? Well, actually, I think differently and I make decisions differently because of the way I eat. Those are decisions and behaviors and practices that evolve through my life. And equally, another saying that resonated as I was growing up is, you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so for me, one of the things that helped with my own personal anxiety throughout, you know, being in rooms where I felt, should I be in this room? And I'm sure we've all felt that when we're lucky enough to be invited to people who we might have, you know, only read about or seen as our idols or hopeful mentors. When we find a moment, whoever that is, that we respect and think, wow, we realize they're just human as well. But in certain moments, our anxiety is high. And one of the things that shifted for me was just being very conscious about who I spend my time with. Are they adding to the version of who I want to be? Or are they holding me back from the version of who I want to be? Are they adding to my present best version of myself, or are they keeping me back to who I used to be that I didn't like very much? And those things, I think, is this balance between, if an internal one is, I'm going to be present, but I'm also then going to make a choice about who am I present around? Sometimes
Really
myself and sometimes others. And that can equally influence me. And I've been, my group of who I surround myself with, and one of the big factors we've been really careful with our mission, Mike and I of AQai, is our community. Who are we surrounding ourselves with? If we've got this massive mission, transforming the mental health and lives of 100 million people, we have to have some of those delusional people that think it's even possible, but also ones that will stimulate others in the belief that it just might be. I'm interested. So we've talked about a few antidotes, and I'd like to finish us off with a few more super practical Rich Alderton tips of, you mentioned stimulants. And I'm curious, I want to know, give me some of these stimulants. As long as they're vegan, Rich, I'm going to be up for them.
That's all right. No animals were harmed, in the making of high performance change.
So give me an idea and thought inside high performance change. I'm coming in and I look down this menu and this recipe, and I'm working through the various things. What might be one of the stimulus and the stimulants that I get, Rich?
Yeah, well, I saw that one of the things that you talk about is grit. And one of the things I talk about is perseverance, which is really, I suppose, the same thing. And one of the it's not really a tool. It's really a mental state, or a motivator that I advocate, is that you can never know how far you've got to go. You have no idea how many hurdles there will be ahead of you. But with every hurdle that you overcome, you know that you're one step closer to getting there. And as long as you can keep on thinking that way, then there is because nothing worth doing is done easily. Right? I start with that, and unless you win the lottery. But perseverance is absolutely so. The ultimate. So there are two levels to adaptability intelligence as we define it on the positive scale. One is the ability to make a difference. When you can see change not as something that causes you fear or anxiety or is a threat to your security, but as an opportunity to add value, to make a difference, then ultimately it's about not just adding value, but it's about adding the most value that you are capable of making. And change gives you the opportunity to explore the limits of freedom, to find out who you are and what you're really capable of achieving in ways that the status quo could only dream about. So if you are going to explore the limits of who you are, and of course, this is all getting very personal now, which is what I love about change, because organizations don't change, people do, is that you're going to find the limits of what you're capable of. That's a long journey. You've got to get out from your comfort zone. You've got to break out of that. You've got to have all the mindset to do that. Then you've got to trust yourself and those around you that you can make this journey, and that if it fails, they'll pull you back rather than slap you in the face. But ultimately, you're going to need perseverance to keep going, because we all have to do that to find out the limits of what we're capable of. And so just knowing that you're always making progress, one step at a time. You kind of hear explorers say this, when they're heading to the South Pole, they just tick off every line of latitude as they go. They don't really think about the goal and getting to the South Pole. It's just eating the elephant one chunk at a time, I suppose. But know that you've overcome that hurdle and you've achieved something, and that's enough to keep you going.
I think that's really interesting. So if the stimulus is the way in which we measure progress, not achieving the ultimate goal, but that we look as progress. And it's interesting, Dan's book, The Gap and the Gain, talks a lot about this. And I've got a few things spinning in my mind at the moment. One is a Viktor Frankl quote of, if we are passionate enough about the what, the why, we'll endure any kind of how and any kind of pain to get there. You talk about the obstacles, and as you overcome, if you're perseverance to it. And Angela Duckworth talks about grit as the two things of perseverance and passion, and a little bit of goal hierarchy. So if we have this ultimate goal hierarchy of a goal, and then these sub goals that are in there that are interchangeable when they are effective or not effective, so what we might call pathways towards it, if we're measuring by our ability to make progress as a stimulus, that can maintain some motivation and maintain us to be more adaptable and more positive. And the other thing that was spinning in my mind was, as you were talking, I was thinking about, well, progress is also a sense of gratitude to where you've got to already, rather than, I've still got 100 other latitudes to get. So I'm anxious about all those 100 other gratitudes. Is actually, whilst we might imagine in the future, we measure in the past. And so those things were spinning around as these stimulus that to get us going. It's why in every single meeting in our business, even within our community, it always starts with a positive focus. What are you either appreciative or grateful for? And so we're reprogramming the set and just quietening the storm from all just being task rabbits. In we jump, zoom, right? Who's done what? What's there? What are you grateful for? What's been positive? Completely shifts the energy to then look at, okay, what's the next 100 latitudes we've got to go forward to? And I think that stimulus resonates with me, Rich. I really like that thinking of progress. And I'm just excited to learn more.
I like the way you start those meetings, because it triggers a thought for me that when I'm talking to leadership teams about this stuff, and I say, well, you're going to have to take this out to your teams, and do you have regular one-to-ones? And I'm amazed. I come from as you said, big company background, highly structured. I'm amazed that I go into even some big companies where one-to-ones are not mandated. They either happen sporadically or not at all, which I think is a real shame. Well, it's more than that, it's a mistake. But when people understand that they need to do them, I then say a second thing, which is that you should always start a one-to-one by asking people how they are doing rather than what they're doing. That whole people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's absolutely bang on. And as soon as you tap into the heart rather than the head, then you've got a conversation up and running, exactly as you start your meetings. Yeah,
and I think that's really interesting, because the how are you doing is, yes, connecting with the person. But if we realize the reality that most people are negative bias, and so how they will pull up something that was negative, what didn't go right, what went wrong, the opportunity for us to reprogram that to help them find not only how you're doing, what went well for you or someone else, what's something positive, so that becomes the default, because it is not the default currently.
No, you're right.
And I think the responsibility for us as leaders, as people who are helping people deal with change, to get that relationship that gives them the new data input that change is good, high adaptability, intelligence, of those things, is to help them find examples of it, to give them that resetting and rewiring in all of those moments. So what are you grateful for is a great antidote. What was positive at various points. What I'm not saying is brush all the negativity under the carpet, under the rug, never give any space for it, but allow the space when you have the energy to deal with it. If you're already depleted and you're already there, your mind won't think right. So if you start with a how are you, and it goes off down a blimmin' horrible track of that, it's really bad.
It's a very good point.
You've impaired their cognitive ability. If during that process, or let's say you have a number of these, you give space for it that allows them to be heard of negative, we need to have that psychologically safe place where they're not going to be judged of those things. But I could talk for a long time with you, Rich. It's been a real pleasure. And I'd like to end with two bits. The first one is, if people want to find out more about you, your work in terms of a high performance change, where do they go and how do they get in touch with you? And then I've got one final question for you after that. But let's hit everyone just with how do they get in touch?
And thanks for having me on. It's highperformancechange.com. There's a whole load of stuff on there and contact details. highperformancechange.com, all one word.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rich. And as a adaptability advisor, I think, brothers from another mother, in where we've found through different journeys to come to this conclusion of how can we best serve humanity, and our observation of this exponential world that's in continual change. It's only ever going to increase. How can we equip people to thrive, not survive, to grow, not collapse or fall over in your context? The other thing, it's a question around, what have you done for the first time? Or when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it? So part of curiosity, part of life, when we're young, everything's the first time and we were doing new things. What often happens as we go through is we lose this ability to go and explore, to be playful, to get comfortable with something being new. So I'm interested, when was the last time you did something for the first time that you can share, and what was it?
Well, I can tell you actually, and it is totally related to everything we've just been talking about, because I think I'm quite lucky. I said at the beginning, I think I'm a pretty adaptable guy. I'd give myself an 8, on a good day, a 9 out of 10.
We'll have to get you to do your AQai, and then we'll
see.
Yeah,
there you go. Then we'll find out the truth.
Yeah.
But so, this to me, this whole journey that I've been on running this business has been pretty kind of one-way traffic, that it's about me talking to people. Of course, I learned things along the way, but I haven't learned too much about adaptability in how it's changed me. However, in the last 2 years, since we went into first lockdown here in the UK, I've had cancer and a triple bypass. And I didn't expect either of those two things to happen. Talk about unexpected change. I haven't had COVID, and it's all good, both all clear now. But I found myself for the first time actually having to apply all of these tools to myself. So I am now the best walking advert for what I do. I wish I wasn't, but I did actually, particularly on the cancer, which was the first thing that I got a couple of years ago. And I walked into the consultant's office, and it was a complete shock to me. I had absolutely no idea that was the news that I was going to be given. I should have realized when there was a Macmillan nurse in the room as well that the news wasn't going to be good. But all of a sudden, what they do is brilliant. The NHS machine goes into overdrive, and I spent the rest of the day visiting just about every department in the hospital. And I really had to go into discovery mode. Yeah. And it was good that I did, because I would otherwise have missed the small nugget that said there's an 80% 5-year survival rate for this type of cancer. It was in my tonsils. I mean, who even knew that was a thing, right? But it turns out that tonsil cancer is only a junior off-peak part-time member of the big C club. And, this wasn't a proper cancer like, liver or lung or what. It was, although it's called cancer, I was totally at the lucky end of the unlucky spectrum. And if I hadn't been in discovery mode, I could have, if I'd been in fight or flight mode, I would have missed that, and I'd have spent the next few days completely unnecessarily panicking. And as soon as I heard that news, I immediately became calm, and it really helped. So I can actually say to my clients, this stuff works.
Yeah, that power of fear to fact. A great reflection of something that we measure is what motivates someone to change in the context. And we look at it on a spectrum of burning platform versus burning ambition. And in different situations, you need a burning platform. Cancer showing up is a burning platform. Change who you are, your diet, your various things, whatever it may be, to deal with it. A burning ambition might be, I want that promotion, that new job. Am I willing, is the squeeze worth the juice? So these things in our life is realizing that we are complex animals. realizing that change for us shows up in various different outfits at various different ways, from health to life to family, what's required. But these fundamental principles that Rich has shared with us today, I think can apply whatever outfit change is wearing, whatever level is required, whether it is a junior club change in its context, or it's a grown-up senior level. You know, if it's a task change versus a job loss, if it's a company collapse versus a new proposition, those outfits can look different, but the principles that have been shared can apply. And it's our intelligence to choose how we apply them that I think is the magic gift. So Rich, thank you so much for the time. I'm looking forward to diving deeper with you on many occasions, but it's been a real pleasure. So thank you.
And likewise, Ross. Thanks for having me on.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.